welcome to the Comic Corner. My name is Damon Gray. I'm your host, and today we welcome a man who has worked on beloved indie titles like Sex Criminals and Public Domain. He's written some small characters like Batman, Daredevil, Spider-Man, but if I keep going, we'll literally run out of time. Fresh off a grand Canadian tour and a little bit of a world tour thrown in there, Chip Zdarsky, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Chip, how was your grand tour?
It was amazing, exhausting, all the above. It's weird being back home after being on the road every day and in a different bed every 2 days. Like after like a couple of days here at home, I was like, I just had the itch. Like I can't be here anymore. Like it's not right to be in a spot for that long. So yeah, it was like a month on the road meeting people. So yeah, it's taken a while to get used to civilian life.
What was the weirdest thing somebody had you sign?
Oh, you know what? Not too many weird things. Um, Geez, that's a good question though. I signed some body parts,
Oh,
which happens. Um, I signed someone's wedding photo because they got married, and it was like a sex criminal themed wedding, which I don't know how you explain that to your parents. Um, but the comic was kind of part of the theme, and they had their wedding photo was them holding up their favorite issues of Sex Criminals, and like all the guests signed the frame around it, and so I was like the last signature on it, I guess, besides Matt. So that's stuff like that's always fun.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
So, something I always ask everyone we have on their first time is what is your comic book origin story as a fan? How did you get into comics?
Oh man, it's hard to remember like my first comic. Like I remember them just kind of being around when I was a kid. Some Spider-Mans and Supermans, kind of big like treasury editions. Um, there was like a Daredevil that was like a weird kind of digest edition. It looked like a novel, but it was just like all the old Daredevil comics like broken up into individual panels in black
Hmm.
and white. Um, Horrible in terms of layout, but as a kid, I was just like it was super exciting. But the comic that got me into comics was Marvel Superhero Secret Wars issue number 7. Um, yeah. Like as soon as I saw that and like all the heroes and all the villains and the face-offs and like the drama, the soap opera of it all, because I was a big soap opera kid,
Hmm.
I was hooked. Yeah. After that, it was like, oh, there's another issue. Like I got to keep getting the next issues, and then I had to go back and get the previous issues, which brought me to like actual comic shops to try and find the back issues. So the collecting part kind of started at that point.
What soap operas did you watch as a kid?
Um, General Hospital was the main one,
Okay.
and I think that was because there's a lot of spy stuff in it.
Hmm.
Like there are like bad spies and good spies, and like there's a princess and all this kind of like really kind of comic booky stuff. So that was like my main one. Uh, but I also I loved Another World. I loved Days of Our Lives. In the evenings, I enjoyed watching Dallas and Dynasty with my mother.
Mm.
Knots Landing was on a little too late for me, but I would sometimes stay up and watch it. All of them. One of my favorite things was there was an episode. It was a season finale of Dynasty, and there was like a big wedding up in like the mountains in some European country, and like the season finale was like a bunch of terrorists bursting through the windows of the church and gunning everyone down. And the last scene was just like all the bodies of all the cast members lying there, and you didn't know who was alive or who was dead. And then they fade to black. It's like find out next season. And I was just like, oh my god, that's amazing. Like that's such a comic book thing, like that kind of cliffhanger. And soap operas are really good at that to kind of hook you for the
Mm.
next episode or the next season. So there's a real crossover there. Because like after like getting into Secret Wars, X-Men was the next obvious one. That was pure soap opera. So yeah, I tend to follow like the ones with the kind of the that soap opera flavor.
So, I want to start out on one of my favorite books from yours right now. I guess it does play out like a soap opera, and it's Public Domain. And
Awesome.
I love it. This is a great, great story you've put out. You've drawn, you've written, you've done everything but edit this book, and it's
Yeah.
been fantastic. How did this
Thanks.
idea come to life?
Um, it actually kind of stemmed from my podcast that I do, which is manga splaining. It's a podcast with my friends where every week I'm the manga newbie and they're the ones who are like in the industry, like they know everything about manga. So they recommend a new book to me every week, and we've been doing it for a couple of years now. And one of the things I noticed was that so much of the manga we read was about like weird specific things that North American comics aren't necessarily about. Like there'd be a book about ping pong or about businessmen and business deals, or a book about like food critics or like wine connoisseurs. Like the North American comics market, when I say that, I mean like, DC, Marvel, Image. They're either like superhero or they're real genre. It's like, oh, it's a vampire story where a vampire is also in a fantasy world, and maybe it's also sci-fi. Maybe it's a western. Like it's about genre. It's not about topics of interest. And so I really love the fact that like manga cartoonists found a thing that they loved in their life, and then did stories about them. And so I started to think like, well, what are the things I love? And I had the real sad realization that all I really enjoy are comics. Like that's my interest. Like all my friends have like hobbies, like collecting records or synthesizers or artwork, and for me, it's just comics. That was sad, and after I got out of that sadness, I realized, well, like I really love the history of comics. Those are the kind of the nonfiction books I read, like any kind of interviews with old creators and stuff. I just like gobble it up. So it seemed to be the thing that made sense to me as a subject matter.
I know many bring up like the real world parallels of in that from like from the movies and stuff like right now in that book, but like what really drives me in that is like that family centric story. It's like it's the
Yeah,
tea, it's the drama in that
yeah,
between in that first volume. I don't want to get into spoilers because I want people to
yeah.
read this book,
Well, yeah.
but it's the ongoing drama of like the father also wanting the son to do this too, to kind of like make the comic too, and you see their relationship unfold. When you approach creating characters like that, how do you do it so it's like they have their flaws, but they're also like really admirable too?
Thanks. And it's kind of it's a natural outcropping of starting with kind of character basics and kind of seeing where it goes. And once you start to introduce other characters and see how they bounce off each other, um, that helps a lot. But my only problem I find, and my Marvel editors can attest to this as well, is I tend to make characters be massive dicks, and my editors have to remind me like, oh, the reader has to care about them too. I'm like, okay, all right, so we'll make sure we do a bit of that. So it's a bit of back and forth because you don't want to push it too much in one direction. Um, Villains in books, the best villains are the ones you can also sympathize with if there's something else there. So even with like Jerry Jasper, the kind of the the kind of asshole asshole older writer, you see later on that there's insecurity there, and that's what's
Mm-hmm.
driving him. Um, yeah, yeah, like it feels like such a writer thing to say. It's character first, dig into the character, but that's really what it is. Like, it could have been a very straightforward comic about creators' rights and the industry and pop culture, but like you want to dig into the family stuff. Like once you start thinking about like comic artists from like the 60s, 70s, 80s, or even today, it's like, what did they have to sacrifice to do that job? Because of the hours are insane. Um, and it's relationships. It's relationships with his sons and his wife, and so it can't just be about you know a battle for IP. It's got to be about like how that affected the family over all those years.
And in the newest arc, you tackle the idea of creating comics and creating stories for the next generation, right? Like what's
Hmm.
really going to reach out to the kids or even the young adults reading those books.
Yeah.
Is that something you think about when you're making your own stories?
Oh, that's really hard because like sometimes in my heart I feel like I'm a kid or a teen or a cool 20 something, but I'm not. I'm old. I'm 47. I'm not quite Mark Waid old, but I'm old. Um, so it's hard because you don't want to force a thing. Like I don't want to start dropping in lingo that I think I've heard teens say and have that be woefully inaccurate. Um, yeah, I mean, this is a comic I made for me, and I made it for my friends in the industry. Like, I'm very happy other people are reading it, but I also recognize it's such a niche thing that is not cool at all. Like, it is not a cool book. There's no like cool visuals, cool characters with cool names. There's nothing flashy. It's not a James Tynion book. There's no hook really. You know, he's the master of coming up with great ideas that appeal to like a wide audience, and I'm seem to be the opposite and suffer for it. So yeah, yeah. So there's no calculation in terms of like trying to hit like a younger audience or an older audience. It's just like, well, I guess I'm the audience. Like it's the things that I really want to do. Because the other thing is like this is the book that I'm spending my time on when I'm not doing like the big superhero kind of books. So I can't really, I don't want to try and emulate those books and the success of those books either. Like it would make a whole world of sense if after Daredevil, myself and Marco went over to Image and did like a Daredevil style book with like a twist, like he's darker than Daredevil or whatever. But like I've scratched that itch over at Marvel. Like I kind of want to do something new that's maybe a bit quieter, and public domain is kind of the natural result of that.
You've mentioned, the big two. There is the
Mm-hmm.
other book that you're doing right now, and his name is Batman. It's
Mm.
kind of a big character, right? And that run so far has been so great, and it's so cool to me because like Nightwing is my
Oh yeah,
favorite
cool,
DC character. So we've
nice.
been seeing a lot of elements of the Bat family, impact that story so far. And
Yeah.
when you talk to our editor in chief in Saskatoon, TJ, you mentioned how right now Batman's like at a point of his life where he's older. He's kind of like that old dad, and he has all these like
Hmm.
crazy kids under him. Like,
Yeah.
how would you describe Batman right now, like at his point in his life?
Whew. I don't know. I think you've just done a pretty good job of it. Like he's definitely at the point where he's kind of looking around and realizing, oh, like I've got this family, but they're also, people hate when he refers to them as soldiers, but I'm doing it. Like they're soldiers. Like they're fighting his one man war in a weird way. And I think he's kind of looking around at his life and his relationships and how much he's kind of like suffered through the years, and he's wondering like, oh, should they suffer the same way? Like by following me into this life, like what responsibility does he have to all these younger people who are putting on bat ears and going out with their sticks and like beating up the Riddler? Because it's there's a good feeling from knowing your children are helping others, but also like any kind of parent, like you worry, like, oh, like I'm a cop, my son became a cop, like is that what I really want for my son? Um, so yeah, it's that older uh, kind of thing where like his body's slowing down. He's kind of thinking about his past, and he's thinking about what his legacy is, and yeah, yeah. All the hopefully the drama kind of will stem from there.
So Tom Taylor right now, he's doing the Nightwing book, and he's also
Hmm.
doing the Titans book. And how much communication is there between you and Tom Taylor, even Tom King, who has some elements of Batman in his Wonder Woman run coming up? Like, is there any like ongoing communication? Just be like, hey, we're doing this, we're doing this. If there's any potential crossover,
Yeah,
this is kind of what's going on.
there are two levels of meetings that I've been doing since I've kind of gone over to DC. There's the Bat group meeting where it's supposed to be once every month. Now it's like kind of once every couple of months. Summer, people on vacation, but we're kind of all the writers of the Batman titles and the editors kind of get on a Zoom and we kind of talk about what's happening in our books and just to make sure everyone's on the same page. And if we can give each other suggestions, we'll do that. So Tom Taylor is in those when he's awake for them because that's the other problem. Like he's in
Time
Australia.
zones,
Yeah,
baby.
time zones actually really mess that up. Like um, so we do talk about stuff there, and then there's another layer where it's like I don't want to say, I guess it's DC architects where it'll be guys like Josh Williamson and Tom Taylor and myself and Tom King with Wonder Woman. Like he's kind of back in the monthly zone with that book. Um, and yeah, and a few other creators of things coming up, and we get onto those calls and like kind of talk bigger picture, like what's happening in like the big titles, what's happening in Superman or Batman or Flash. Like let's see if these things line up at all, and what can come from that. So those are kind of like the visual talking kind of communication points. And like if I have a question, I'll reach out to either Tom's and sitting with them and myself. But for the most part, they're pretty separate. Like especially Nightwing and Batman, because Nightwing's obviously Bloodhaven and Titans, and he's got kind of all that going on there. If he was like a bit more Gotham based, it might be different. Um, but yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean,
So
I'm looking forward to seeing people at conventions. Like if I can
yeah.
start kind of doing those again, that'll make things a lot easier. I know, like especially Tom Taylor like flies over for the conventions at least. So I think there's going to be like a big meeting in San Diego, which I'm not going to be able to get to. So I'm going to be like FaceTiming in at a party, just like, what did you say? What did he say? Wait, sorry, back up. Like it's going to be horrible.
The chaos of
Yeah.
comic creation. So this Batman run obviously is not your introduction to Batman. You did Batman the Knight, which was
Hmm.
one of my favorite Bruce Wayne stories because
Oh,
it's not
cool.
like it's a
Thanks.
Batman story. It's a Bruce Wayne story, and it is how
Yeah.
he became Batman. But it was so well done. What was that pitch process like?
DC approached me. It was kind of this weird period where I just kind of negotiated my way out of being exclusive at Marvel.
Mhm.
It's that weird thing. Like I only ever signed up for like 1 year at a time with Marvel, just because you never know what's going to happen. Didn't want to be necessarily stuck. Um, uh, and yeah, I negotiated a non-exclusive contract like 2 months before COVID hit, which was like maybe the best, luckiest move I ever made because there were a lot of people that were stuck in contracts that also didn't have any work, but they couldn't go elsewhere to get the work. So it was like, okay, now I can play at both companies and make my mortgage. So on a purely professional financial level, um, that was great. And so it was at that time that um, the editor Ben Abernathy kind of pitched the general idea of like we've never really done a mini exploring Bruce Wayne's kind of travels across the world. Like there have been stories throughout the Batman runs that touch upon it, but never like an actual story. And so that was an interesting challenge. I was just like, oh yeah, like that would be fun to kind of incorporate some of those previous adventures and like figure out a proper list of mentors, um, and do a Batman story without Batman in it, which is really tricky. And then when we got our artist Carmine, I felt bad for him because I'm just like, hey, here's your big chance. We're doing a 10 issue Batman book. Oh, by the way, you don't get to draw Batman, um, which every artist enjoys doing. But he rose to the challenge. Like he was so good, so fast. He nailed the mood perfectly. Him and Ivan on colors, like yeah, they were just like a dream team. That book kind of hit the schedule like clockwork. Like I think we were almost done the whole thing by the time issue one came out, which is unheard of. But it was like our pandemic project, and the reason it was 10 issues is because like I think they wanted it to be like 5 or 6, but I'm just like but if he's going somewhere different every issue or two, like we'd only have 3 places or 2 places. Like we kind of need to see him globetrot and build this story. So they were supportive of that, which it was fantastic. A lot of times it can be a bit of a fight to try and get extra pages and extra issues. Um, so yeah, like once we hit the ground running on it, it was like I'm not going to say it was easy, but yeah, it flowed really really well, and I was really happy with how it turned out.
Oh, it's great. I love it. I have the trade. I have every single issue comic of it. It's fantastic. It's one of, like I said, one of my favorite Bruce Wayne stories. It's just you
That's
really get to
awesome.
know
Thanks.
Bruce Wayne.
Yeah. And
So you
I was going
mentioned
to
it.
say
Yeah.
one of the things with it too is, and I feel bad. I always downplayed it because I didn't want to give anything away, but um, elements from Batman the Night are going to kind of like influence things that happen in the Batman title kind of down the line. Um, yeah, I didn't want people to rush out and like pick it up and then be upset that nothing happened for 2 years, but
I
but
was
yeah,
gonna
I'm
ask you about
proud of
that. I was
it,
like,
and it
he
affects
probably just
the
he's probably
current
done with those
continuity.
questions. Yep.
I don't know.
So, like you just said, you recently, you jumped over the pond, I guess you could say. You went from
Yeah,
Marvel to DC, and you're
yeah,
finishing up your Daredevil run right now, and
yep,
it's been wonderful. And it's really felt like two different parts, right? Like we've had the first part pre Devil's Reign, which is very
yeah,
grounded, very much that typical, like not typical because it was freaking fantastic, like that grounded Daredevil story. And you brought in
yeah,
Elektra as the woman with no fear, and then after that we get very fantastical. And I think
yeah,
Daredevil's one of those characters that's really cool because you can make both of them work, and it just
yeah.
fits that character, right? When you kind of approached both stories, even when you went into the second act of it, I guess you could say, did you approach that character any differently?
Um, only only because he changed throughout the run. Like his experiences in that first half are what kind of galvanized him into that second half. Like uh, being responsible for the death of that man, and then going to prison and seeing what prison is and how it's not really there to help make the prisoners better. There's no real cure in modern prison. It's so rare, anyways. Um, so really, in the first half of the run, he's a little bit lost, and in the second, he's figured it out, but maybe he goes a bit too far in that direction. So yeah, so that's kind of the change of the character, and like he kind of inspired Elektra in the first bit, and then she kind of inspired him in the second bit, and maybe she inspired him too much, and maybe he inspired her too much. So they kind of crossed each other on the weird kind of moral spectrum, and that's what's kind of leading towards our end.
We had a very, very insane final kind of page. For those who haven't seen it, go
Mm.
get it because we have a great, great new suit. And
Yeah,
when you ask for your art market for a new suit, like you're just like, just make the dopest thing possible, or like,
yeah. Like I
how
mean,
do you go about that?
like the like Elektra's design as Daredevil, and Matt's kind of redesign as Daredevil through the second half. Like that's almost all Marco. Like there's very little suggestion for me. Just like, oh, it's a bit bigger, a bit more grand, but kind of still got some ninja qualities, and he just delivers these amazing outfits. As for the suit reveal on the last page, I actually have to give credit to Matt Fraction on that one.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah. Like I was talking to him a bit about like kind of what my plans were, and I don't want to give anything away, but he was just like, Elektra had a similar thing when she was like purged of whatever. Um, this is me trying to not give anything away, and so I'm like, oh, that would look so cool on Matt. Um, just keep it like traditional, but change that color. Um, yeah, yeah, and I knew it would look good throughout the next couple of issues as well. I'm just like, oh yeah, this really is going to work. Um, so yeah, I mean, it was just nice to see kind of Marco draw that kind of traditional design again, like his original design. Um, and then Matt Wilson on colors is the one who kind of really, flipped the switch on it.
are you and Matt Fraction still? You talk a lot. I know you two. You did Sex Criminals,
Yeah,
obviously,
yeah.
and because I always have to credit Matt and David Aja on their
Oh
Hawkeye
God, yeah,
run
yeah,
because that's the comic book that got me into comics. Like
yeah.
that made me fall in love with it and made me lose all my money.
Yeah,
but
yeah, I know. It's
the
always that good and bad of the situation, right? Like,
but
yeah,
I will forever owe so much joy and happiness thanks to Matt Fraction and David on their work and just
yeah.
introducing me to that. So that's really cool to see that even though you
Oh
you and
yeah.
Matt you haven't done that Sex Criminals run in a while, you're still chatting.
I mean, we were really good friends before Sex Criminals. Like we met in like the early 2000s on like the Warren Ellis forum and all the Delphi forums. It was where Matt met Kelly Sue, his wife.
Mm.
Like it's where Kieran met Jamie McKelvey. There's so many comics people that just kind of started there. And so Matt and I were like buddies for a long time before we just came up with the idea to do a book together. And then uh, the book took off, changed our lives, and strengthened our relationship, elevated us to best friend status pretty quickly because we had to experience the whirlwind of the first couple of years of Sex Criminals together, because it was nuts. Like I wasn't used to it, and he was not really used to it either. Like the kind of
Mm.
reaction we get at conventions or like Sex Criminals fan parties. It was just like it was, yeah. You want to talk signing weird stuff. Those couple of years, we signed a lot of weird stuff. Um, so yeah, I mean, we're best friends, and like we talk almost every day on text, and if we're ever near each other in a city or something, we hang out. Um, a couple of months ago, I went to Vancouver to visit him because he was shooting a TV show there, and he showed me the sights. Uh, yeah, yeah, he's the best. I'd love him to do more comics again.
So I've heard you say you like to get your artist's favorite characters into your stories. Like with Jorge with
Yeah.
Superman and Marco with Spider-Man. Is there a character that's your favorite that you try, if the story fits, you try to sneak in there?
Not anymore. Like I kind of got that out of my system with Howard the Duck because like basically like Howard the Duck issue 1,
Hmm.
I was like, okay, this is a mistake. Like somebody's hired me to make a comic. I was like, well, I'm just gonna throw things in just to say I've done it. Like Spider-Man shows up in issue 1, and She-Hulk shows up in issue 1, not because they're necessary to the story.
Hmm.
It's because I thought I was going to get canceled by issue 2, and I wanted to have written Spider-Man before that happened. There's so many guest stars that show up in Howard the Duck, and after that in Star-Lord, that that's like, oh yeah, I'm just checking boxes all over the place. So yeah, I mean Spider-Man's always fun to kind of throw into a situation, and because he is, and he's the main reason why I put him in Daredevil besides Marco, um, is that he's the moral center of the Marvel universe.
Hmm.
Like he's the character that like everyone relates to the most, and he's the one that like, yeah, where Spider-Man goes, the reader goes.
Hmm.
That's why in Civil War he was like that guy trapped in the middle. It's because yeah, he's the reader. He's all of us, and like where he goes, we go. So yeah, he's fun to use as a guest star and fun to write in his own series. Yeah, because like before I put him in at the end of the first arc of Daredevil, I didn't know Marco was so. I mean, enamored isn't the right word. He's feverishly passionate about Spider-Man. So as soon as I put him in, I'm like, oh man, he drew him really well. Marco like was emailing me like, I love Spider-Man. Put him in again. Put him in again. And so I just did. I just kept putting him in again. He's just like, when are we gonna do a Spider-Man story together? I'm like, hey, I'm doing Batman. Sorry, pal.
Is there a DC character you haven't written yet? I know you're kind of you jumped over, but that you haven't written that you're like, that's the next one I want to do.
Um, None. Again, I kind of scratched a lot of those issues because I did a Justice League miniseries, which kind of covered kind of like the Trinity and like
Mm.
kind of the big characters of the Justice League. Um, so that was fun to do, and also I got to throw Lobo in, which was definitely one of my favorites. Besides that, like I like Plastic Man. I think Plastic Man would be a lot of fun. He's one of those characters I think most creators really have an affinity for, but also the sales never reflect how much the creators love the character. I mean, if I had time, I would probably do something with Plastic Man.
Chip, thank you so much for taking the time. Where can people find you?
So you're asking where people can find me?
Where can people find you? All over the
Oh,
internet.
all over the internet. I don't know. Whatever. Who cares? Who cares where I am? I've got a
Well,
Substack. You can go find me on
yes, you
Substack.
do. I was gonna say, well, you can find you on a Substack. You got a
Yeah,
great
yeah.
Substack.
The newsletter covers everything. People can be sick of me over there.
You have great newsletters for those
Oh,
who
thanks.
haven't joined them yet. They're hilarious, but they're also very informative. You talk a lot about stuff going on in the industry and, of course, your own stuff that you've been putting on your Substack. So if you want to be like me and you're very far ahead on public domain, go join the Substack.
It's true. Yeah, I tend to put up stuff before it's out in print form there. And it's just fun to write. Like I think that's not to criticize other newsletters, but some newsletters feel like an onus on the writer to put out a newsletter, and I'm just like I enjoy doing it.
Be sure to keep up on all the Agents of Fandom podcasts, like the Agents of Fandom podcast, the self-titled Agents of Fandom podcast, Fandom Academy, Ticket to Reality, and the newly announced Cinema Sibs. And you can check out our other YouTube shows like The Critics, and be sure to follow our socials on Twitter and TikTok and Instagram. And you can catch me on Twitter so long as I'm still on it at Damon Tweets. You can find me on TikTok so long as I can still access it at Damon Talks Comics. And you can find me on everywhere else, like Blue Sky, that's a new one, or Spoutable, that's a new one. There's way too many social medias out there, and who knows which one will stick these days.
There's so many more places to find you than me. It's amazing.
And no one wants to hear me. Chip, thank you so much for taking the time coming on and chatting about all the amazing, amazing work you've done. I can't wait to continue to read more of your Batman. I can't wait to read more public domain. Can't wait to see what else you come up with, because you provide so much joy and wonder to all the readers.
Get out of here.
I do mean it. Your stories do. I always read it. I'm like, man, that was a good comic book.
Sweet.
Always.
Thanks.
Always. Chip, thanks again. Everyone go read some comics, and more importantly, go support your local comic shops.